does the United States begin to do? If we look at what the United States actions are, you can see that they are connected to what's going on in Europe. There we go. So in 35, we mentioned that we have this arms embargo. But remember, in 35, there's not really a lot going on. It's much more of a symbolic act. In 36, we have this embargo also. This is a little bit, there are things that are going on, particularly Germany moving into the Rhine line, but it's still not a war. So from the American perspective, it's still sort of a symbolic act. FDR doesn't necessarily support the 36 arms embargo. Remember, he is calling for a quarantine. But since there's no war going on, this is a symbolic act. It allows many of his own people to feel in calm kind of public sentiment that we're not going to get involved with this war. No, we're not going to get involved with this war. We're not going to do what the people did in World War I. We're still going to stay out of it. And so that's what the arms embargo was doing. It's a symbolic act. In 37, this is when we begin to see Hitler progressing, Italy progressing, and we change the arms embargo. Very important. It's called cash and carry. What this means is that we will begin to sell materials. Not necessarily weapons, but materials. So that if England gets involved, or if some of these other France gets involved, we will give them. They have to pay in cash, and they have to carry the materials away. Why do you think requiring them to pay in cash and to haul it away themselves, why do you think that's an important symbolic position from the Americans?
Well, it kind of shows that America isn't getting involved. If you're taking this dangerous substance and doing with what you want, and it blows up in your face, it's not my fault.
Yes, good point. Remember, there's this weird popular idea that it was the munitions manufacturers that got us into the war, that what they did is they kind of maneuvered themselves, and so American interests were put into harm's way, and because they were put into harm's way, then we were forced to get in there. So if we aren't giving credit, then we don't have to worry about protecting our investment. If they carry it away, we don't have to worry about our ships being sunk in the process. But we can still engage with trade, and we can still support people without actively being involved. It is a change. It's still symbolic because we don't have a main war going on in 37, but it actually opens up the way that if a war begins, what can we do? We can pick a side. What's different between World War II, this isolationist movement, remember it's not a policy, what's the difference between the World War II isolationist movement and the World War I isolationist movement is that in World War I, we really weren't necessarily in favor of one side or the other. In 1914, we believed all sides were equally at fault for starting this war. In World War II, when we're looking at these two differences, we are not blaming England and France. We are, however, becoming more concerned about Austria and Germany and Italy and Japan. We are not impartial. So then we look at the last little thing. In 37, we have an arms embargo. There's no war. We are going to shift. Germany, I'm going to go back to the smart board. Germany promises not to get involved. But he's lying. This is that famous Munich Agreement. This is the picture of the famous Munich Agreement. I just shifted out PowerPoint. But that's Hitler. That's Neville Chamberlain. This is the agreement saying we are not going to be military. We're going to find peace in our time. Hitler said that he's going to follow these rules. And so we're going to avoid war because we're going to at least give him what he needs and he's not going to ask for anything more. Well, within a few months, that's all it takes. Within a few months, Hitler takes the rest of the Czechoslovakia. Not only do we start with the Sudetenland, but he ends up taking the rest. he makes a very weak argument saying they all wanted to join the great mighty fatherland, nobody wanted to be left out, but the truth was everybody knew that he just took it over, just like he took over the Sudetenland. This was an area that he needed strategic positions on. This is in 1939. In 1939, the United States is becoming very aware. England and France is becoming very aware. They're telling Hitler, you promised not to do this. And one of Hitler's famous lines is, well, it was a piece of paper, right? You can't be bound by a piece of paper. Sudetenland, the Russian Czechoslovakia wants to be involved, we're going to be involved. We're going to take it over because they want to be part of us. Poland, by September, Hitler starts saying, we need even more room. And they start looking towards Poland. Europe says, this is the line you cannot cross. Now, unfortunately, Europe has told them about all sorts of lines that you can't cross. You can't remilitarize. You can't go into the Rhineland. You can't join up with Austria. You can't take the Sudetenland. And every single time, they gave in. You can't take the rest of Czechoslovakia. They give in. And so when they start looking at Poland, you can understand why Hitler doesn't necessarily believe that Europe is going to do anything. Now, he does make provisions, and this equally important. Throughout this time period, even though Italy, Germany are dictators, and the Soviet Union is dictator, in terms of their rhetoric, the way they spoke about it, Hitler is always blaming the Soviet Union as communists and as a dictatorship. And the Soviet Union is always blaming Hitler as an example of what happens when you don't have communism. It's a fascist dictatorship. So in terms of their rhetoric, the speeches that they make, Hitler and Stalin hate each other. But in actual practice, they're all dictators. And they all support the rule of the might. And in 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union enter into what's called the Berlin Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. What this means, I'll shift over to the map here. Here's Germany, there's Poland. You don't see it, but Soviet Union is on the other side. The Non-Aggression Pact technically says Germany, Hitler has an agreement with Stalin. It says if we go into Poland, we're promising you that we are not interested in going into the Soviet Union. We are not interested. It's non-aggression. So if we go into Poland, we don't want you to think we're attacking you, so we don't want you to fight, enter into a war. Now this is a big agreement because verbally these two leaders have been yelling at each other for years. But in actual fact, the public agreement says non-aggression. Non-aggression, that just means we won't fight you. That's the public part. The private agreement, and we find this out during and after the war, the private agreement is much more strong of an agreement. Hitler says, we go into Poland, we'll take Poland, and we will divide Poland in half. So half will be German, and half will be the Soviet Union. And in exchange for this, we will let you take over Finland. And you can invade Finland, and we won't do anything about it. What does that mean if we agree to divide spoils and allow someone else to take over something at the same time we're taking over something? What would we call that? An alliance. So even though the Soviet Union technically says that they're on the far opposite side, they're the exact opposite side from Hitler, in 1939 the Non-Aggression Pact is actually an alliance. So in 1939, Italy and Germany had already had an alliance. They'd also joined up with Japan earlier that year, so there was an alliance with Japan. And with the Non-Aggression Pact meant that they also were joining up with the Soviets. So all of these groups are now on the same side. As soon as this Non-Aggression Pact is passed, Germany invades Poland. When Germany invades Poland, Europe declares war. England and France declare war. Now, there's a funny thing. The war is being fought this direction. Germany plows through Poland. It doesn't take very long to take over Poland. France is sitting over here on this side of Germany. England is across the water. They declare war, but they don't do anything. For years, this is sometimes referred to as the Phony War, because England and France are at war against Germany and Austria and Italy. Soviet Union technically isn't publicly connected, but they are on that side. So they're kind of an ally. England and France, Belgium, these guys are very concerned. There's a war, but they don't do anything. There's no fighting. Because the war is actually going towards the east. It's being over Poland. The Soviet Union is taking over Finland. That's where the fighting is, but there's nothing going towards France and England. And so observers from the United States, some of them are calling this a phony war. Because they declared war, but there's no troops being sent out. There's nobody fighting. This is in September of 1939. Why isn't there fighting? If they really are declaring war on Germany, they should be sending troops over. They didn't. Now let me give you another picture of where Germany is. France, Belgium, England, Switzerland, Italy, lots of these little countries here, Poland, lots of Russia. So this isn't a good scale, but it's close enough. Here's Germany and Austria. Here is France. Here's Belgium. Here's England. Here's Ireland. Here's Italy. Here's big giant Soviet Union. Okay, there's Poland. Most of the conflict is happening on this side. And yet, everybody is technically at war. Italy is in North Africa. Austria and Germany are fighting in this direction. Soviet Union is fighting Finland, which is up here. Finland, Sweden, Switzerland, Denmark is up here. Soviet Union is going this direction. Okay? So there's fighting up there. But there's nothing here. Now, if you remember last war, World War I, Germany did not fight directly with France. Germany went through Belgium. Well, there's a ton of mountains there, and so that was a complete surprise. And if you remember, because they went through Belgium, most of World War I was fought there with trench warfare. Germany got stuck there. So most people thought Germany would not do this again. France thought that they're not going to do this again. So France builds this wall. Literally, it's a big wall. In fact, it's an amazing wall. It's got these turrets every so often that are built in with concrete. And this wall actually has tunnels so that every so often there's a turret with a gun sticking out in concrete, right? And under here is transportation network. So it's kind of like trenches, except it's fortified and it's built there. So turrets all up and down this line, lots of forth. It's almost impregnable. So Germany is being told you can't go this way. So there are some people in England and France saying, well, the reason why we aren't attacking is that we're waiting for them to attack us. This is much more of a kind of a rule of law type of approach. We're not attacking just for the sake of it. We're telling them we are now at war. So if you turn your direction towards us, we will respond. So they don't do anything because they're relying on this really impressive wall. The United States, on the other hand, is looking at this, and many of our isolationist folks are saying this is a phony war. England and France is telling us that Germany is a big threat, but in fact, if England wanted to take out Germany, they could take out Germany anytime. They're actually trying to use this as a way of sucking the United States back in. You have to understand just how resentful many Americans continue to be about World War I. That disillusionment is still there. We shouldn't have gone into World War I. We're not going to go into World War II. Keep in mind, though, that that is a public movement. It's not a policy. This is what the public wants. And I talked about this last class. 90%, though, are in agreement. We don't have to be in this war. Well, this phony war really only lasts about 9 months. And Hitler takes the time, when nothing is happening, to rearm, re-prepare, and they immediately launch what's called Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg is the same, it means lightning war. We do not get stuck anywhere. We go very fast. We have fast tanks, we have fast planes, we have fast trucks, so we are not walking into your territory. We are going to be storming through your territory. Everybody thought that this wall would prevent Germany because nobody would go through Belgium because Belgium was too rocky. Well, it turns out Germany went and did the exact same thing that they did in World War I, but this time they did it with a much more mechanized army. They went through Belgium in 3 days. Totally shocked. Now, once they go through Belgium and they're on the other side, you can begin to see the difficulty of this amazing defensive network. What's the difficulty? Can you tell me what that difficulty is, Virginia?
It only points one way.
It only points one way. So as soon as they get behind this wall, this is concrete. Literally, it only goes one way. It is completely useless. Germany is able to plow through France in 30 days. 30 days, Germany now has Belgium and France. It's gone. When this happens, the United States no longer, when I say United States, I mean the isolationists in the United States, no longer complain that this is a phony war. Clearly, it's not. Some of the isolationists, because they really don't want to get involved with this, start saying, well, maybe it's better. Let Germany kind of take over. Let Germany be the main power in Europe. Maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. It still doesn't affect us. Remember, the Americans have this sense of Fortress America. As soon as France is taken over, Germany is launching an air raid on England over and over and over and over again. So we go back to what's going on in the United States. When the war erupts, the United States gets rid of its embargo laws, completely gone. And what it says is lend, lease. In other words, we are not neutral in this conflict. The Germans, the Austrians, this power might, the Italians, they are clearly at fault. The Europeans did all they could to prevent this war. This is not a situation where we could say everybody's at fault. Germany is clearly at fault. We are not impartial. We clearly favor the rule of law over the rule of might. And so as a result, we are going to lend, we are going to lease, we're going to give whatever supplies the Allies need, military or otherwise, anything. We're going to give it to them. We are not, however, getting into the war. Why? Because again, 90% of our population doesn't want to get in. At the same time, virtually everybody is supportive of giving England and France whatever tools they need, especially after France falls. Then there's no fear of a phony war. They are genuinely in it. So in 1940, this is after the phony war, this is at the Blitz. This is the Blitz, London Blitz. That means Germany is bombing London just almost to victory. The United States is very supportive but we still don't want to be in the war. FDR has secret intelligence. He knows what's going on. Hitler's 4-year plan, which basically says we'll take out England, then we'll take out the Soviet Union, then we'll go down to Africa, then we'll go to South America, and we'll go in, we'll take out the United States. FDR realizes that there's no such thing as a fortress America, that this is coming. But he can't force the United States into the war. He has to just simply prepare. So we begin to prepare. The U.S. prepares. By this time, and especially because of the U.S. preparations, the Great Depression is no longer an issue. It is done. It is over with. We are now focused almost exclusively on military issues. Now, very big event happens. It's called the Atlantic Charter. We're going to talk about this in, I think, on Wednesday. The Atlantic Charter is in 1941, but it's in the summer of 1941. Winston Churchill is from England, okay, meets with FDR, who obviously is the U.S. And we meet off the coast of Newfoundland. And I don't know if you know where Newfoundland is, but it's basically Canada, okay? So Canada is not yet in this war, but it's on the British side. England and the U.S. are meeting secretly. Why would we meet secretly? It's on a ship off the coast of Newfoundland. This is in 1941.
Okay.
So when did the war start? What would Hitler do if he found that Churchill and FDR were meeting on the same ship?
Probably start invading England.
No, he would blow the ship out of the water. You have to meet secretly because there's danger. It's in the middle of war, right? He would love to have known that. There's no qualms. Because remember, Germany is not based off of the rule of law. That was what they looked back in 1915. That was the problem. We obeyed by these rules. So whatever niceties, diplomatic niceties we may have had way back in the wind, they don't have here. If Hitler knew that FDR and Churchill were on the same boat meeting on this time, they'd sink it. They'd put as many of the troops as they could to try to sink that ship. So this is a secret meeting, because it's in the middle of the war. And the FDR, remember, the United States is not in the war yet. Some things that happened that have changed matters. Early, I think it was late 1940, maybe early 1941, I can't remember the exact date, Germany invades Soviet Union. This is an absolute shock. Now, it shouldn't be a shock, because for years, Hitler and Soviet Union were yelling at each other and insulting each other and talking about how they were both the worst scourges of mankind. Yet, in 1939, they had this Non-Aggression Pact. So Stalin actually thought that we say these things because we're letting our people know that we don't like you. You are something like a straw man argument, but we don't really not like each other. The fact is, we're kind of two of a kind. And Hitler and Stalin had kind of an understanding. And so Stalin was literally dumbfounded when Hitler struck. Why do we know this? Because when we look at what actually happened, when Germany invades Soviet Union, there were no defenses. There were no defenses. So Stalin really was not prepared. They didn't expect Hitler to do this. It was truly a betrayal. And Hitler took full advantage, wiped all the way into Soviet Union. It was a huge advance. They were about 10 miles outside of Moscow. They put a siege on Leningrad, siege on Stalingrad. Soviet Union really was that close to collapsing. And it was because the Soviet Union didn't expect it. The rule of might kind of was a certain brotherhood. Soviet Union thought that they were on the same side. They were betrayed, and because of this, where does the Soviet Union go to? They are no longer fighting with or even tangentially supportive of Germany, so they are now supporting with the English and the French and the Americans. And in fact, the American Lend-Lease is being given supplies to England, giving supplies to France, and giving a ton of supplies to the Soviet Union. Soviet Union is now on the Allied side. It's very, very important. When we come to the end of this war, and we look in the future, and Germany is defeated, Japan is defeated, Italy is defeated, Soviet Union is on the victorious side. Are all of these guys, all these countries, do they share the same belief? Does Soviet Union share the same ideology that England and France and Belgium and the United States does? No. This is giving us a hint of what the future Cold War will be. But we're just going to keep that aside. Atlantic Charter is important because the United States and England are meeting in Newfoundland secretly. And in this agreement, they're making a plan for the future. FDR knows that the United States does not want to get into this war, but FDR is not an idiot. FDR knows, and he's got secret intelligence knowing that Germany is going to attack the United States if it can. So even though the movement, the isolationist movement says we don't want to get in the war, FDR knows sooner or later we're going to get into this war. But at this point, the United States is giving through Lend-Lease all of the support that they can to England, but we're not physically in the war. But we have a meeting with England because we're giving this the support, and FDR knows eventually we will probably be in this war. He doesn't know when. It's actually a lot sooner than he thought. Within about 6 months, we are now in this war. But at the time of the Atlantic Charter, we're not. At this Atlantic Charter, we make an agreement. The United States said we're not going to follow what we did the last time. Remember the last time when we said we're going to have this League of Nations, we're going to have democracy on a global level, and we won't have any war again? You guys goofed on that. You blamed Germany, but more importantly, you created a League of Nations that really put England and France at a higher level that protected your empire. That's why we weren't supportive of it. It wasn't really a rule of law. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay out our priorities. The first priority is we need to stop Hitler. This is critical. Okay? We both agree on that. We have to stop Hitler. Secondly, though, we need to create a new world order. When Hitler is removed, we are not going to punish Germany. We are going to remove Hitler and then help Germany rebuild. And we're going to do this because we are going to create a foundation of basic rights. 4 freedoms. 4 freedoms. Basically what this means in plain language, the reason why it's not all that critical for us, is that this is the same concept that we started at the beginning of our country. We basically, on the idea that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are endowed with their creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Essentially, this is what we today call human rights. And in the Atlantic Charter, FDR in England and Churchill are in agreement that as long as we establish a new world order based on these 4 freedoms, we won't have war again. But there's a price. England has to agree to decolonize. You must give up the empire. If you do that, then we can honestly promote these 4 freedoms. The United States will be happy to be part of this new world order. We will create a United Nations, which is stronger than the League of Nations, because it's going to have a military component to it. And the United States won't have any hesitation being a part of this as long as everyone really does agree with these 4 freedoms. And if you decolonize, then we don't worry that the United Nations is just a tool to support British Empire. That's what got us upset in World War I. But if you decolonize, then we really are creating a new world order based off of sovereignty. Individual countries can just have their own vote. We don't have to fight. We don't have to have alliances. This decolonization is a big price, and it's very important to understand that England agrees. And even though France is not there, France has been taken over by Germany, the French government is in exile in London. That means that the France still exists, it still has an empire, and everywhere outside of the French mainland there still is France, but they're not here, they're in exile. When this agreement is made, France also agrees. The Atlantic Charter is important because it establishes the objectives of the war. It's not to destroy Germany and make British Empire strong. The objective is to genuinely create a new world order based off of democracy. This is what we wanted to do with World War I. And at the time, England and France weren't going to have anything to do with it. They weren't thinking in those terms. But after World War I, by the time we get to the 30s, they're understanding the importance of the rule of law. And Churchill understands the importance of World War II as a battle over these ideologies. We either have a world dominated by might, a rule of might, which means we're going to have constant wars over and over again, or we have a world dominated by the rule of law, which means that it's not a threat that causes you to do something, it's whether or not you're following the rules, whether it's the law. If all the countries can get together and establish basic standards of decency, then you can be whatever country type of a government you want inside, but you won't have as much of a threat of war. And if our countries can all strive to honestly try to guarantee the four freedoms, then you're not going to want to have to come up with a war to justify your own dictatorship, which is what we're seeing in World War II. This Atlantic Charter provides the purpose for the war. It's important that we know that England is there. It's important that we know the United States, of course, is the one that's pushing this on them. And France, even though they're not there, is an agreement. Who is not a part of this Atlantic Charter? Soviet Union is not a part of this Atlantic Charter. Why are they fighting with the Allies?
Because Germany invaded them?
That's the only reason why they're fighting with the Allies. And so we can see that this is something that will come up after the war. But for the beginning, it's making sure that England and the United States, even before the United States gets involved, are on the same foot. This is in 1941, in the summer of 1941. You remember December 7th, the day that will live in infamy, is when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. That is when the United States gets involved. So the United States joins countries that have already been at war. The Soviet Union knew it's only been fighting for about 6 months on the Allied side, but then England and France, who've been fighting for a very long time, and Belgium, of course, they're all joined as the Allied force. And at this point, this is when you have a full side of the Allies against a very, very strong full side on the Soviets.